Picture this. The same bloke who once declared a car nothing short of magnificent has quietly turned the art of brewing into an enterprise worth millions. And the way he's gone about it? Saving British agriculture while giving the corporate world a very public middle finger. Jeremy Clarkson didn't just walk into the beer business. He blew the doors off it. And what he's constructed will fundamentally reshape everything you thought you knew about British beer. 2020. Jeremy Clarkson stood inside a cold, rattling tractor shed on his diddly squat farm in the Cotswolds, confronting a problem that would have broken most people. His first serious barley harvest had just come in, 1,000 acres of it, and not a single buyer was coming forward. The major agricultural players had zero interest in modest quantities grown by a television personality with muddy boots. Grain merchants were quoting him figures that wouldn't stretch to cover what he'd burned in diesel. His farm manager, Caleb, put it to him plainly, "Jeremy, we're going to lose money on every single ton." Any weekend farmer would have shrugged it off, claimed it as a loss on the tax return, and picked up a camera again. But Clarkson saw a completely different picture. 5 decades of drinking proper British bitter, the kind his father ordered at the bar, the kind quietly vanishing from pubs up and down the country, had taught him something. Standing in that shed, surrounded by mountains of perfectly usable barley that the market had rejected, a single idea surfaced. That idea became Hawkstone Brewery. What unfolded next demonstrated that the finest business ideas sometimes emerge from pure stubbornness and a total refusal to accept what others say is impossible. Clarkson didn't reach for something slick or contemporary when naming his brewery. He turned instead to Hawkstone Park, a grand Shropshire estate that once ranked among the great spectacles of Georgian England. Back in the 18th century, Hawkstone drew the aristocracy in droves, who came to gaze at grottos, follies, and landscapes engineered to inspire awe. By the 1990s, the whole place had collapsed into ruin, forgotten, swallowed by undergrowth, utterly abandoned, a mirror image, as it happened, of rural Britain itself. Choosing that name wasn't a masterstroke of branding, it was a declaration. This brewery would be a tribute to what Britain once produced, once prized, once stood for. When Hawkstone Lager hit shelves in October 2020, right in the gut of a pandemic, with pubs shuttered and the entire brewing sector teetering, the industry assumed Clarkson had finally lost his grip on reality. Who in their right mind launches a premium beer when there's nowhere to drink it? But Clarkson had clocked something the major breweries had completely overlooked. People were at home. Money that would have gone toward holidays was sitting in bank accounts, and people were hungry for small, meaningful indulgences that felt like something special. Within weeks, Hawkstone was running dry faster than it could be restocked. Clarkson had stumbled into perfect timing, and he'd produced something that felt genuinely, authentically British in a way that Carling and Stella had never managed. Here's what separates Hawkstone from every other famous face beer brand. The barley going into every can is grown on Clarkson's own land and on neighboring farms sitting within a handful of miles of the brewery. Not freighted over from Germany or Denmark or wherever the monthly cost sheet looks most attractive. Grown in Oxfordshire and Gloucestershire by farming families who've worked that same soil across generations. It sounds like a lovely story. In practice, it's a quiet act of rebellion. British brewing once functioned exactly this way. Every region had its own breweries drawing from local supply. Then the corporate giants absorbed everything, and suddenly every beer tasted identical, because it was all assembled from the same industrial components sourced at the lowest possible price. Clarkson's refusal to budge on local barley means Hawkstone costs more to produce than anything the mass market churns out. It also means every pint drunk is funneling money back to British farmers who are clinging on by their fingernails. The margins are tighter, the principles are larger. He's demonstrated you can construct a profitable drinks business that genuinely supports the rural economy rather than quietly draining it. And because this is Clarkson, every bit of it has been laid bare. The costings, the setbacks, the outright failures. That transparency has forged a bond with customers who've grown exhausted by corporate greenwashing and pledges that evaporate on contact with reality. For decades, British consumers have been fed a quiet lie that we can't produce a decent lager. Lager belongs to Germany, Czech Republic, Denmark, not us. Our contribution is bitter and ale, served warm, served flat, take it or leave it. The big industrial brewers were perfectly comfortable with this story, because it let them sell watery lager under European-sounding labels at premium prices. Clarkson encountered this received wisdom and responded the way he always does. He ignored it entirely. Hawkstone lager is brewed using traditional techniques and British ingredients, and it's actually good. Not good for a British lager, genuinely, objectively good. The brewing establishment tried to wave it away as a vanity exercise, celebrity noise that would fade within 6 months. 2 years on, Hawkstone was sitting on shelves at Tesco, Sainsbury's, Waitrose, and Morrison's, outselling craft beers that had spent a decade building their market. The reason is disarmingly simple. It tastes the way lager is supposed to taste. Clean, crisp, no chemical aftertaste. And it's brewed on British soil, by British workers, with British ingredients. Something that resonates far more deeply than the metropolitan beer critics ever anticipated. Clarkson had inadvertently filled a gap that nobody had even identified. A premium British lager that people could raise with genuine pride. When Clarkson first threw open the doors of his farm shop in 2020, he imagined it might draw a curious handful of passers-by. What followed was unlike anything a Cotswolds village had ever seen. Tens of thousands of people descended on the place, queuing an hour to browse a shed, paying over the odds for vegetables, logging it all on social media. The council attempted to put a stop to it. Residents complained about gridlocked country lanes. But something profound was happening underneath the circus. People were reconnecting with the source of their food in a way that hadn't been seen in a generation. They wanted to stand on the land, talk to the people growing what they ate, grasp the unglamorous reality of British farming. Hawkstone Brewery absorbed the benefit of all of it. Every visitor to Diddley Squat Farm was surrounded by Hawkstone products. Every episode of Clarkson's farm showed the beer being brewed, sold, consumed. Product placement money simply cannot buy that kind of reach, and the crucial difference was that every frame of it was real, because the beer genuinely came from that farm. The Diddley Squat effect transformed Hawkstone from a regional curiosity into a brand with national recognition. People who'd never given craft beer a second thought and had no particular feelings about agriculture were buying Hawkstone because they felt personally connected to the story behind it. Clarkson had, without really planning any of it, assembled the most effective organic marketing operation in British brewing history. Hawkstone doesn't come cheap. A 4-pack sits at roughly the same price as premium imported lagers, sometimes higher. Every consultant in the industry would have told him that was commercial suicide. British drinkers want affordable beer. Everyone knows that. But Clarkson made a deliberate calculation. He wasn't going head-to-head with Carling or Foster's.
Ronnie.
He was going after Peroni, Estrella, Birra Moretti, the premium tier that people reach for when they want something a cut above the standard round. And Hawkstone had a story none of those brands could touch. It was genuinely British, genuinely local, and the person whose face was on the can had physically grown the barley inside it. The price point also communicated something important. This is serious beer, not a celebrity licensing deal. Cheap beer means cheap ingredients and shortcuts at every stage. Hawkstone's price reflects the reality of using proper British barley, paying workers properly, and refusing to compromise when the easier route was available. And people have paid it without hesitation. The beer moves consistently well, despite costing more than the alternatives, because customers believe they're getting something that justifies the price, and because Clarkson has been straight with them about exactly what they're buying. In 2022, Hawkstone rolled out 3 new products almost simultaneously: a Pilsner, an IPA, and a cider. The industry expected at least one to fold. Most young breweries spend years developing a second product. Celebrity brands almost never pull off a successful range extension. All 3 sold strongly from day one. The reason was that Clarkson hadn't simply commissioned a contract brewery to badge whatever they already made. Every product was developed seriously, alongside experienced brewers and cider makers, applying the same local-first sourcing philosophy that had made the lager work. The cider caused particular irritation among the established cider giants, because it exposed an uncomfortable truth about how little actual apple makes it into most mass-market products. Hawkstone cider is made from proper cider apple varieties grown in the Vale of Evesham and the Cotswolds, not eating apples padded out with sugar. It tastes like cider used to taste, before the big companies turned it into fizzy, alcoholic fruit cordial. Within months, it was competing directly with Strongbow and Magners in supermarket aisles. And winning. Clarkson had done it again, walked into a market owned by industrial products, and proved that if you give consumers an honest alternative, they'll take it. Hawkstone could have been produced anywhere. Contract breweries across Britain were hungry for work and would have produced it at lower cost than building a dedicated facility. Clarkson refused. The brewery in the Cotswolds employs dozens of people drawn from surrounding villages, many of whom had lost livelihoods when local factories shuttered or farms mechanized beyond needing them. These aren't minimum wage positions. Clarkson pays above the sector average, on the basis that people who are paid to care will actually care. The result is a team that treats the product as their own. The head brewer has been there since the first batch and could command more money at a large industrial operation, but stays because the creative freedom and proper resources are worth more. Delivery drivers know their customers by name. Bottling staff take personal ownership of what comes off the line. It's an unfashionable way to run a business. It works. Staff attrition is nearly zero, which means the beer is produced by people who understand it and give a damn about getting it right. In an industry where most product is assembled by workers who've never once tasted what they're making, that difference shows. By 2023, Hawkstone was running into a wall. Supermarket shelves, covered. Pub taps, largely blocked. The big brewers had stitched up pub distribution through tied house agreements and exclusivity contracts, and they had no intention of making room for a competitor. Clarkson's response was characteristically blunt. He launched a direct partnership program offering independent pubs superior margins on Hawkstone compared to what the big breweries were giving them, backed by direct delivery and hands-on support. By every precedent, it shouldn't have worked. Small breweries had attempted similar approaches before and been crushed. But Clarkson's profile meant pubs could use Hawkstone as a draw in its own right. Landlords started putting it on their boards outside, and people came through the door specifically to try it. Fans of Clarkson's farm would seek out the pub in their area that stocked the beer they'd watched being made on television. Within a year, more than 500 independent pubs across Britain were pouring Hawkstone, and a significant number reported it outselling lagers that had been on the bar for years. The large breweries were not pleased. Clarkson had bypassed their entire stranglehold on distribution by turning his beer into a destination, something people made a deliberate choice to seek out. Pubs weren't just adding another lager tap. They were offering a story, an experience, a reason to come in. Every drinks company now claims sustainability. It's almost universally meaningless. Hawkstone's version is different because it's specific and trackable. Barley grown within miles of the brewery means transport emissions are negligible. Brewing is powered by renewable energy from solar panels installed directly on the brewery roof. Spent grain goes back to Clarkson's farm as cattle feed, completing a loop that wastes nothing. Even the packaging is built for recyclability, and Clarkson has been publicly candid about how frustrating it is to do this properly in a country where recycling infrastructure is so patchy. None of this is virtue signaling. It's operational efficiency that happens to be environmentally sound. Clarkson isn't chasing a net zero badge. He's running a business without unnecessary waste. The outcomes are the same either way. Hawkstone carries one of the lowest carbon footprints of any significant beer brand in the country. And because he's admitted the difficulties, talked openly about supplier failures and unexpected costs, people actually believe him when he makes sustainability claims. That credibility is priceless. Hawkstone sponsors country fairs, farming events, and rural festivals across Britain, not headline music festivals or city pop-ups. Specifically, the unglamorous grassroots agricultural gatherings where farming communities congregate. It generates almost no press coverage. It has been staggeringly effective. These are precisely the people who understand what Clarkson is trying to achieve, who care about British agriculture at a personal level, who turn into loyal customers for life. At these events, Hawkstone doesn't just plant a branded gazebo. They explain the brewing process, introduce people to the farmers supplying the barley, and let attendees compare mass-market lager with properly brewed beer side by side. The real return on this strategy is evangelism. People leave those fields and go home and tell their friends about a beer that's genuinely made properly, that puts money into farming, that tastes better than anything they'd been buying from the supermarket. Recommendations from trusted sources are worth more than any television campaign ever could be. Clarkson has cultivated an entire volunteer army of advocates who believe in the product because it genuinely merits belief. Grassroots marketing in the most literal possible sense. Most drinks brands budget millions for campaigns featuring airbrushed imagery and carefully workshopped copy. Hawkstone's marketing spend is essentially nothing, because Clarkson is the entire marketing department. Every time he references the brewery on social media, it reaches millions of people without spending a penny. Every episode of Clarkson's Farm featuring the beer is a half-hour advertisement that viewers actively choose to watch. Every newspaper story about his planning battles with the Cotswolds Council mentions Hawkstone somewhere in the copy. His entire public identity has become a promotional vehicle for the brewery, and it hasn't cost him a budget line. What makes it function is that it's completely genuine. Clarkson isn't performing enthusiasm about his own product for the camera. He drinks it. He serves it to guests. He talks about it because he's actually proud of what they've built. When he rails against the big breweries for cutting corners on ingredients or squeezing farmers dry, people take him seriously because he's made different choices himself. The authenticity is the strategy, and it outperforms anything a conventional advertising campaign could deliver. Other famous faces have tried to replicate this formula with their own drink brands and come up short, because they couldn't manufacture the genuine conviction Clarkson has about British farming and honest production. In 2023, Hawkstone signed a distribution agreement with a major drinks wholesaler, opening up access to thousands of retailers across the country. Industry observers immediately assumed this was the moment Hawkstone sold out and became just another label on a corporate portfolio. They were wrong. The contract specifically preserved Hawkstone's commitment to local sourcing and traditional brewing. The logistics and reach were the only things being handed over. The wholesaler had pursued the deal because retailers were proactively requesting Hawkstone by name, something that almost never happens with brands less than a few years old. The immediate effect was that Hawkstone appeared in corner shops, off-licenses, and independent retailers that could never have ordered directly from a Cotswolds brewery. The beer became accessible to anyone, anywhere. Within months, sales had tripled. The deal revealed something important. Hawkstone wasn't a niche product for affluent Southerners with an interest in farming television. It had appeal right across the country. People everywhere wanted to back local brewing and British agriculture. They just needed it to be convenient. Late 2023 brought another announcement. Clarkson was taking Hawkstone into export markets across Europe and beyond. The industry found it amusing. British lager shipped to Germany and Belgium, the brewing heartlands of the continent, the equivalent of exporting umbrellas to Manchester. But the logic was solid. Millions of British expats and tourists around the world want a connection to home, and the international craft movement is hungry for authentic provenance stories. Hawkstone's narrative: recognizable broadcaster, real working farm, actual local ingredients, is precisely the kind of origin story that moves premium products in international markets. First exports went to the predictable destinations: Spain, Portugal, France, wherever British expat communities have put down roots. Then orders started arriving from less expected quarters: Australia, Canada, corners of Asia, where British culture still carries weight. The export business remains modest against domestic volumes, but it's growing and profitable, because Hawkstone commands serious premium pricing abroad. Clarkson took what looked like a disadvantage, being overtly British in a world of continental lager dominance, and converted it into a selling point by going directly to the people who specifically want something British. Step inside the diddly-squat farm shop, and you'll find roughly as much Hawkstone merchandise as actual beer. T-shirts, caps, glassware, bottle openers, even branded dog bowls. On the surface, it looks like shameless monetization of a fan base. Look more carefully, and it's a very smart business decision. Merchandise delivers better margins than the beer itself, and every customer who walks away wearing a Hawkstone t-shirt becomes a moving advertisement, and they funded the privilege themselves. But the merchandise operation goes beyond margin optimization. It builds community. Buying Hawkstone products gives people a way of affiliating with something, a movement to back British farming, to choose quality over industrial convenience, to register a quiet protest against the corporate model. The merchandise is a membership badge. It's the same psychology that drives football shirt sales and band merchandise. Identity, belonging. Clarkson has constructed a lifestyle brand around beer, almost by accident, and the financial returns on lifestyle brands are exceptional. Every brewery on Earth struggles through January and February. Post-Christmas excess, depleted bank balances, grim weather, beer consumption drops, and it drops hard. In 2024, Hawkstone launched a winter warmer ale specifically to address those months. Darker, richer, higher in strength than the lager, something designed to be cradled by a fire rather than cracked open in a beer garden. The established players told Clarkson he was making a mistake. Seasonal products are commercially precarious, and ale drinkers are fiercely tribal in their loyalties. The winter warmer sold out in weeks. It turned out there was an enormous untapped appetite for a proper British ale built on the same foundations as the lager: local ingredients, traditional methods, no shortcuts. Sales across January and February 2024 climbed 40% year-on-year, driven entirely by the winter warmer. Clarkson had smoothed out the seasonal revenue trough that haunts every brewery, and done it by listening to what customers actually wanted rather than deciding he already knew. The winter warmer is now a permanent part of the range. It's also brought in a new audience of ale drinkers who'd never have reached for the lager. Hawkstone runs brewery tours and farm visits for schools and colleges, taking young people through the process of how beer is made and where it begins in the field. This isn't about encouraging drinking. It's about education in the most practical sense. The majority of British teenagers have no working idea that barley is the foundation of beer, that hops grow on climbing vines, that fermentation is applied biochemistry. The tours make the link between agriculture and science tangible in a way that no classroom can replicate. Teachers are enthusiastic supporters because students who might otherwise stare at ceilings are suddenly engaged, largely because Jeremy Clarkson is involved. The long-term commercial logic is obvious enough. These students become legal drinking age in a few years, and they'll remember the brewery that gave them that experience. But there's something more sincere beneath the business case. Clarkson believes, with evident conviction, that reforging the connection between young people and British agriculture is essential to the industry's long-term survival. If the generation coming up has no relationship with the countryside and assumes food materializes from warehouse distribution centers, British farming has no future. The education program is enlightened self-interest, good for Hawkstone, and genuinely good for rural Britain. In 2024, Hawkstone entered into partnerships with high-end British restaurants to develop pairing menus, dishes designed from the ground up to complement the beer. This was essentially uncharted territory for lager. Beer pairing was the preserve of Belgian ales and artisan crafts, not British lager sitting in a supermarket fridge. But Michelin-starred chefs started putting Hawkstone on their drinks lists and building menu items specifically around it. Lager had arrived at the fine dining table, and Hawkstone was setting the place. These partnerships reached an audience Hawkstone had never previously accessed: affluent food enthusiasts who'd walk past it in a supermarket without a second glance were encountering it in restaurants they trusted implicitly and following it home. Clarkson had achieved something genuinely difficult: elevating a British lager into a product the dinner party set would serve without embarrassment, while simultaneously holding on to the working-class core audience that had championed it from the beginning. That balance is extraordinarily hard to strike, and most brands that attempt it fail one constituency or the other. Clarkson has spoken with unambiguous candor about where he wants Hawkstone to go. His aim is for it to rank among Britain's major breweries within a decade, competing directly with the industrial giants, not by imitating them, but by proving their model is approaching its expiry date. A larger brewery is in planning, one that could triple output while preserving every commitment to local sourcing. Conversations are underway with farming cooperatives across Britain to establish regional barley networks, distributed local supply chains rather than one centralized operation feeding everything. It's an ambitious vision, arguably an audacious one. A national brewery operating on genuinely local principles, supporting farmers in every region, demonstrating that scale and integrity don't have to be mutually exclusive. Anyone else floating this idea would be laughed out of the room. But Clarkson has been wrong about nothing so often that betting against him now looks like the riskier position. He's shown that British consumers will back British brewing, properly done. He's built a brand with emotional substance behind it. Whether he can grow it to genuinely challenge the big players is still an open question. Nobody's answering it with a confident no. Hawkstone Brewery carries an estimated value of £75 million, and that figure is heading upward. Clarkson has made serious money from beer. Bring it up with him and he redirects the conversation to the farmers with a guaranteed market for their barley, the brewery workers with stable employment, the independent pubs that have found a product that actually brings people through the door. The commercial success is real and considerable, but it's instrumental, not the point. The point is keeping British farming viable, keeping rural communities from hollowing out, proving that a modern business can be built on values that predate the spreadsheet. What Clarkson has built with Hawkstone means more than the financial figures communicate. He's demonstrated that a famous face brand doesn't have to be a shallow exercise in margin extraction. It can be a real business creating genuine value. He's proved that British consumers are willing to care about provenance and process, provided someone is honest enough to tell them the truth about both. He's built a brewery that contributes to British agriculture rather than just borrowing its imagery for label design. Agree with him or not, and Britain remains vigorously divided on the subject of Jeremy Clarkson, the achievement is hard to argue with. He took a shed full of barley nobody wanted and built a £75 million empire that is actively reshaping how British beer is made, sold, and thought about. Jeremy Clarkson turned a surplus harvest into a £75 million brewing empire that is propping up British farming while rewriting the rules of what British beer can be. From field to glass, this is what one man's refusal to accept the obvious answer actually looks like. Hit subscribe and stay with us for the next story. Another empire built in ways that will genuinely surprise you.